Alright, so I got a couple of tips for you. In case you've been playing Bitcraft Online and you're wanting to know a couple of things that will make your life a heck of a lot easier. Let me start off by saying you can shift right click on pretty much everything. If you go into your keybinds, right? If you want my honest 2 cents, the first thing you do in this game is you go to settings, you go to controls, you go to keybinds. There are a couple of things that a lot of people may or may not know that are kind of handy to know. Like, for example, you've got in here, you can have your move and interact set to RMB, which is how a lot of people introduce the game. But I do it in reverse. I do RMB to move to cursor, and I do LMB to toggle and interact, shift and left click to toggle and target context menu. Yes, me, that's a huge quality of life improvement. But something else a lot of people forget is targeting. Q is basically going to, if you hover over it with Q, okay, this is going to highlight all the objects near and around you. It is a huge time saver if you want to avoid having spent a lot of time. Second tip, obviously, if you're somebody that isn't terribly familiar with the way Bitcraft is and you are just now learning the game, I'm going to tell you a couple of things that you will definitely want to do. All right, every town, and it doesn't matter where, okay, is going to have these vendors. What I recommend you do is you want to make said things for said vendors. That sounds like a really common thing that a lot of people would do, but traveler tasks are items that, generally speaking, sell. So if you want to make hex coins in this game, and a lot of it, I recommend making the items for these vendors. You will find that you will oftentimes make a lot of hex coin if you turn around and sell them in the ancient cities. It's just the way this game is. However, there are a couple of things that I think run by a lot of people that they don't know. That is to say, if you go into Rumba, for example, okay, there are some stuff in here that you may not run into very often, but it's called a massive personal cache. You want to get a brick slab, then a tier 4 brick slab, a tier 2 brick slab, and you want to get this thing as soon as you possibly can. The reason why is because you now have a carryable inventory that if you go hook up with a town, you can now put in the middle and basically put all your items in it, and you don't have to worry about where things are going. So if you want my 2 cents, that's a big, like, you do that probably right out of the gate. The other thing you do is you do swim quests. Why? Because you want the skiff. The skiff is the fastest boat, so therefore it makes sense to get the ship sailing and basically get this skiff, which requires tier 2 equipment, cloth, timber. Nothing out of the usual there, but again, I highly recommend doing that. Now, something that has just recently came out was the player housing update, and the basic gist that I can tell you what this is that you're going to need a lot of tier 1 stuff. So if you press B, this will show you all of the different items in the game that you can build. And one of the things that you're going to actually spend a stupid amount of time on is conveniently storage. And one of the things that I've kind of look for is in these residential houses, right? So like over here we have a third house. I went ahead and got the Brico deed so that I could go ahead and make a home. So I can go ahead and move in, enter in, and then the first thing you do when you're in the new player housing is literally all you need to do when you're in here is treat this like your personal storage, because you can now move this particular player housing over to a different city. It takes a while, but you could basically move as you go. So in a sense, this is kind of your own little personal storage container. So obviously there are varying degrees of tier of quality of container here, right? But if you get the bigger chest, obviously you get the better items, but you can see a lot of it's tier 4 planks, rope, and then you also need the nails. So I mean, that's the basic gist that I can tell you regarding player housing, but honestly, that's really about all there is to it, is finding a little house that you can settle in, assuming it's already not fully occupied. Now, that said, about the only other thing I recommend is paying attention to gear. So if you press H, you can see your equipment. You want to upgrade your tier as you're working your way through it. As somebody that has literally gotten through, and I've got like 55 Mason, 40, and then, like I'm not so... A lot of these are what I describe as dependent on each other, but in terms of like what often almost is in super high demand almost all the time is scholars. And if you're a mason, you're going to pretty much depend on forestry for wood, for being able to cook. You need forging to make the clay. You need the masonry to obviously make the bricks. And then you need the mining to actually get the bricks. And get this, that's the whole cycle, right? But, of course, then you need the tools. Well, now you need smithing. You need, obviously everything is really more or less dependent on, where you're at in the regions too. So my last and final tip is paying attention to where you are on the map. Okay, like in this particular case, all right, we're in Vertrasa. So if you wanted to know like a lay of the land and you want to join the Hearth, or you're wanting to be out and around this particular region, which mind you is Hearth Rest on the map, okay, basically for anybody out in the internet that wants to have a cheat sheet, okay, this is the Autumn Forest biome, okay. This is your tier 2, like tier 1 simple like tree biome. Okay, Ludinia in this region here is your forest biome. You go over here and you're going to transition into the swamp biome if you get up to Bloodreach, and you'll have basically rocky gardens. But this area in here in between is where you'll both find a T5 node as well as basically anything with tier 4 clay, tier 4 anything, and tier 5 mostly everything in this general area. If you go to Kraken Kokodono, I've been told this is where you can find Elvenar caves and therefore get your tier 4 nodes. The desert, from my understanding, is over here by Damascus. And then the islands over here are Rocky Gardens in this general area. And really about the only other thing that you would probably need to know is basically like your tier 3, tier 4 stuff as far as trees are concerned, or in Ludinia in that region. If you're wanting to like get into the Misty, it's kind of like it's this weird quasi mix, is where this is. The other biome of question is the jungle, and if you're wondering where the jungle is, that's down here. This is just this weird little section down here. But in case you were wondering where this stuff is, like this is Drasilia, like this is where all that stuff is. Now, of course, if you get over here, this is back to the tier 2, simple stuff. But I just thought, in case anybody happens to be wanting a really quick, easy, to the point, like where everything is, that's basically this area. Now, I will say that I did originally start out in Taverna, and I can speak on Taverna a little, which is to say I've been to New Haven, and I've been to pretty much a good chunk of the regions up and around here. I will say that, much in the same way like the snow biome, I know is there. Of course, you'll always want to look for the ancient trees. If you don't know what that is, basically that's where you can get, you can get some really good stuff. But more or less though, right? That is all I recommend as far as like biomes in general, like knowing what is in what biome. You could honestly look it up on a wiki, but if you want a, simple to the point answer, basically most of your like tier 4 clays and stuff like that can be found in the swamps. Your tier 3 through 4 stuff like that you'll find in the forests as far as trees to rocks go. Now, if you're wanting like tier 4 rocks, for example, then you go to the Rocky Garden biome. But obviously, anything or everything that you do find, press U to be able to actually view where stuff is. Of course, I do highly recommend joining a town. And the reason why is because, like in an ancient town, you only get 1 kill. In our case, obviously I've got many kilns going. So I, I try to make as many bricks as I can, and then I flood the market for items that people need. And that's how I make the hex coin I need. And then what I do is I actually press J. And then if I'm looking for an item or I need something, I just go to market search. And honestly, you can just type in like, I don't know, like simple brick, for example. Now you could type it, and I recommend actually type what you're after, copy it with Control C, delete it, Control V, paste it. And it, for whatever reason, this will actually do a better job of actually filtering and finding the items that you're looking for. And mainly you just want to pay attention to the sell orders tab, because that's what's actually being sold. Buy price is just what people are willing to buy for that item. Now, if you're wanting to get down like the refined route, like if you're wanting to make anything refined, period, then there's really only a couple of things you need to know, which is that you're going to need fishing, because basically to do refined anything, right? The ingredients in question is fire sand. And how do you make fire sand? You need to be a scholar. So you're going to have tier 1, 2, 3, 4 of Scholar, and then you get clay gypsite, and you basically take gypsite plus the crushed shells, which is the bait you get for fishing. You put those two together, and you get fire sand. Then you put fire sand with brick together, and you get refined brick. And then it's rinse repeat. You know, then you got to take so many refined bricks to make the next tier, and however many fire sands, and so on and so forth. And that's the basic gist of how that whole thing operates. But again, just to make your life a little easier, that's kind of how all that works as far as making refined anything is concerned. And Codex isn't along those lines. Like, all that mumbo jumbo is a whole different spiel for another video. But other than that, I will say that for most, if not all people, the one thing that can be said is you want to be able to basically travel, go to Waystones, as many cities as you can in general. You can walk a majority of it, but once you get a skiff, you can pretty much take a boat and do the rest. And that is pretty much it. And that's almost everything you'll ever need to know. With any luck, hopefully that helped you out, and I will see you guys next time.